All right, back to the narrative of the Old Testament. And once again, by reminder, we are in the days of Israel's history before they had kings in the Exodus period. We saw how God prepared Israel for the Exodus out of Egypt, and we have been in the part of our story where God is preparing Israel for entrance into the land of Canaan. Now, preparation for their journey or their exodus into the land of Canaan consisted of three things. The Ten Commandments, we've covered that. The tabernacle compound, we've covered that. And now the temporary consequences, which is going to be divided up into a couple of segments. Where we left off last time, they were at Mount Sinai. And we're going to cover from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, and I'll show you that on a map here in just a second. And next week we'll cover from Kadesh Barnea up into the land of Canaan. That's about 40 years, folks. Now, here's the map. Remember, they came out of the land of Egypt, over there on the left or the west side of the map, the land of Goshen, took a journey down and crossed the Red Sea. Some major incidents. God purified some water for the 2 to 4 million people to drink because there wasn't any there at Marah. And then he gave them something to eat. He provided manna every day. But at the same time, he brought in a bunch of quail for them to eat. They complained about the water. They complained that they were hungry, and God responded. And then they got thirsty again. And God had Moses strike a big rock out there in the wilderness, in the desert, and out of it came enough water, a constant stream, for the people and all of the animals to drink. Immediately after this, the Amalekites said, "What are these people doing in our territory?" And they started attacking the Israelites. And an untrained army of Israelites under the leadership of Joshua defeated those Amalekites and sent them packing back to where they were supposed to be. About that time, they came down there to Mount Sinai, gathered around the mountain where it was smoke, earthquakes, fire, and the booming voice of the Lord, which gave them the 10 Commandments. And then God calls Moses up to the mountain for 40 days. Moses didn't have anything to eat or drink. God miraculously sustained him. Toward the end of those 40 days, he says to Moses, "You know, those people down there are up to mischief." And Moses goes down with the 2 tables of the 10 Commandments in his hands. And he heads down there and he sees that the Israelites, under the leadership of his brother Aaron, have taken a bunch of gold earrings and molded them into a golden calf and said, "Behold, Israel, your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Why? Because they wanted something tangible. They wanted something tangible, something they could see, smell, taste, whatever, in their worship. But God said, "You shall not make images." That's not how you're going to worship me, because whatever image that you make is not going to be representative of me. It is going to demean my holiness and my character and my beauty somehow. In fact, I think that this was an absolute insult, because one of the major gods of the land of Egypt was Apis. And Apis was a bull. Big, powerful, muscular bull. And how did they represent Yahweh? In a calf? Like he's less than the Egyptian god Apis? What an insult. So Moses throws the stone tablets on the ground, breaking all of the 10 Commandments. And then he grinds that golden calf up, throws it in the stream, and makes the Israelites drink of it. So you know what he does next? Most people ignore this. He's on his face, on the ground, prone, 40 days and 40 nights without food or drink again. God miraculously sustains him. So he hasn't had anything to eat for 80 days, folks. And then what happens? God calls him back up on the mountain for another 40 days. to get some more of the law and another couple of tablets which feature the Ten Commandments. Okay? So, and he also brings down the instructions concerning the tabernacle. And the tabernacle takes a number of months to make. The tabernacle is completed in the month of Abib. Now you guys should remember the month of Abib. What is taking place in the month of Abib? No, you didn't forget your wife's birthday. It's the Passover. And the tabernacle is completed just in time for the Passover. And in the day after the Passover starts the Feast of Unleavened Bread, goes for 7 days. And just as soon as it is over, God says, I don't know, maybe he thinks he's Clint Eastwood, head them up, move them out. And they have to pack all their stuff, fold up all their tents, and head out on the trail again. Now, when I was in the Marine Corps, we'd be out sometimes for a couple of weeks at a time in the jungles of Okinawa. And we'd get out there, and I was in a mortar platoon, and the base plate for the mortar, because we carried the mortar in pieces, the base plate alone weighed 28 pounds. Not a big deal. You can carry that for, with one hand for about 100 yards. Then you got to switch hands. And after about 7 or 8 miles, you're really dragging. And they won't let you tie it to the backpack, because if you're going to war, you've got to be able to get that down on the ground at a moment's notice and set up that mortar. Well, I'll tell you, we'd get to a place that we'd stay for 2 or 3 days, and it'd be comfortable. There'd be a running stream, and we'd be all relaxed and everything. And then they'd say, all right, pack up your tents. It's time to move out again. You know what we did? We grumbled. Well, this is the situation that the Israelites are in. They have been out of Egypt now for 2 years. And they have been many months at Mount Sinai. And God says it's time to move, to go forward, and to head up there to Kadesh Barnea. Now, you see where Kadesh Barnea is up here? And this is Sinai, back down here in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula. And they're going through a very, very rough and desert area. And it's a place where nobody wants to settle. So, what's the first thing that these guys do when they have to move out? Well, you know their history. What do you think they do? They complain. Sure enough. And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. What misfortunes? Nothing. It's just that they're used to sitting around, and now they got to get out and do something. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them, and consumed some of the outlying parts of the camp. Now, remember what happened all the other times that they complained? They complained about water. God gave them water. They complained about having something to eat. God gave them something to eat. But now that the law has been given and they are accountable and they know what kind of God that they're dealing with, consequences begin. Now they start small. Nobody dies in this one. All right? Now, I need to remind you that when they came out of Egypt, it wasn't just the 12 tribes of Israel. There were a bunch of Egyptians and people from other nations that tagged along with them. They were called the mixed multitude, and sometimes they are referred to as the rabble. Now, the rabble that was among them had a strong craving. They got tired of eating this manna that appeared on the ground every day. And so they start whining. Now, you've heard me before as we went through the book of Philippians. Something about whining that you must never forget. It's contagious. It spreads. And they start whining, and the people of Israel start weeping. They join in. Yeah, we're hungry too. Oh, that we had meat to eat. And the anger of the Lord blazed hotly. You want something to eat? I'll give you something to eat. and he brings quail flying into the camp of the Israelites. And they're flying only a meter or two off the ground. And they're low enough so you can just grab them or beat them with a club. And they had quail to last for an entire month. And God says you're going to eat for an entire month until it comes out your nostrils. You think he's kidding? I was in the Marine Corps with a fella who was from South Alabama. And he was telling me a story about his grandmother. And this I don't understand, because I don't like my vegetables so that you can spread them on a sandwich. His grandmother used to cook butter beans, and she'd have several pots of it on the stove. And he'd say, Sergeant Profetto, he said, she'd be cooking those butter beans all day long. And the smell was filling the house, and I love butter beans. And I'd snitch some every now and then, and she'd warn me, you snitch any more and you're going to pay for it. Well, about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I just couldn't help myself, and she caught me again. So she sat me down at the table, and she put a bunch of those butter beans in a bowl. And I thought, wow, she's getting soft. So I ate those butter beans, and I started to get up. Oh, no, you're not finished yet. And she fed me butter beans until I threw up. Sergeant Profetto, those butter beans were coming out my mouth. They were coming out my nostrils. It happens, folks. And God made it happen with the Israelites, and some of them choked to death. The Lord smote the people with a very great plague. Consequences are starting to begin. Next up, just to show you, this wasn't limited just to the people of Israel. Here's the leadership. You know who Moses' brother and sister are? They are Miriam and Aaron. Aaron is 3 years older than Moses. Miriam is at least 10 years older. She's the one that got sent down the river with the baby Moses when he was in the basket to make sure that he was well cared for. And so Moses' brother and sisters spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married. Does anybody know where the land of Cush is? The land of Cush is now in the region that we refer to as Ethiopia and Sudan. You know what color those people are? That's right, they have a very nice tan. Wow, he married a darky. And people say, God disapproves of interracial marriage. Well, here we've got an interracial marriage. And Moses' brother and sister are complaining about it. Well, what happened to his original wife? Well, he had trouble with the original wife. Remember when he was heading over out of the land of Sinai into Egypt to bring the people out of Egypt? She got a little miffed at Moses because Moses' God required circumcision. So there may have been some conflict there. And you know what Moses does? Sends her back. Next thing we hear, Moses' father-in-law, he doesn't want her either. He brings her. And it says that when Moses saw his father-in-law, he kissed him and said, come on in the tent. Doesn't say what he did with the wife. It may be that Moses got a divorce. It may be that he sent her away, and when Moses' father-in-law, who didn't want to be part of what God was doing with the nation of Israel, even though he was invited, didn't want to be part of what God was doing, he went back. He may have taken Moses' wife with him. So anyway, Moses marries somebody else. He marries a Cushite woman. Well, he married outside of Israel. Folks, that's okay. If you marry outside of Israel, just make sure that that person is of the same faith. It's not a racial issue. It's not an ethnic issue. God wants us to marry people who believe as we do, because we will be anxious to please our husband or our wife. And if they are of a different faith, There's a danger that they will change our hearts and lead us astray from the Lord. No, 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 it'll never happen, said Solomon. Solomon's wives stole his heart away from God. It'll happen, and that was the wisest man up till that point. So, God gets involved and says, "Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them. And when the cloud was removed over the tent, behold, Miriam had leprosy, and she had turned white as snow. It's like, oh, you think it's really important to marry a white person? There, you want to be white? Be white. And she had leprosy for a week until she was let back in to the congregation. God is starting to issue consequences for not trusting him and for not obeying him. All right, next up. They're camped outside of Kadesh Barnea. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men out to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one of them a chief among them." Now, folks, he's not just taking volunteers. He's not just taking a young man. He's taking people in the tribes of Israel who have positions of importance. People who are supposed to lead the people under them in the right direction, and in this case, to follow the Lord. So they get over there and they spend 40 days spying out the land of Canaan, which we now know as the land of Israel. And when they come back at the end of 40 days from spying out the land, they've got this great news. "We came to the land in which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey, and this is some of the fruit." That's really not a good depiction of the amount of grapes that they carried, because you could probably carry that with your hand. But the amount of grapes, the cluster of grapes that they got from the valley of Eshcol had to be supported on a pole that they bore between a couple of them. Let me tell you something. This is no shabby place that God is giving the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Man, this is good stuff, and they ought to be really excited. Now, you husbands know this. When you say to your wife, "Honey, you are the prettiest girl that I know. You are the best cook, and I love how you take care of our children." And the next word out of your mouth is "however," for her, it cancels everything that you said up to that point. And guess what the next word is out of the spy's mouth? "However, the people who dwell in this land are strong, and their cities are fortified and very large." That means they have big walls. How are we going to get over those walls? And beside all that, we saw the descendants of Anak were there. And all the people that we saw there are men of huge stature. They're really tall. And then we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers. So we seemed also to them. In other words, what they're communicating, what these spies are communicating to the people of Israel is, it's a great place, but we can't go in there because we're outnumbered and we're outsized, and they've got these great big walled cities, and there's nothing we can do about that. So what do you say we just elect a leader and head back to Egypt? But there were a couple of those spies. Remember, there's 12 spies. 2 of them are convinced of the power of God, and that if we obey God, God will provide us the resources and the ability to accomplish what he wants us to do, no matter how frightening the situation is. So Joshua, the son of Nun, I guess he had no parents, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those 12 spies who spied out the land, tore their clothes. That means they're really upset. and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land that we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. What do? They hone in and they focus in on the good news. And if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into the land. What does God want from us? He wants us to trust him. No matter how overwhelming the odds are or how frightening our situation is, God says, just do what I tell you. Do what you're supposed to be doing. Leave the details to me. And Joshua says, if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, this land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, because you're in a situation where you've got to fear. You can be afraid of them, or you can be afraid of Yahweh. Now, who do you think is stronger? Who do you think is going to give you and your children the worst consequences? My bet is with Yahweh. I don't want to cross him. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge, not the fear of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and all the termites that live in that land. Only do not rebel against the Lord. He warns them again. And do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. What's that mean? That means we'll gobble them up. When we say to some guy, I'm going to see you out on the playground at lunchtime, and I'm going to eat your lunch. Oh, that's what Joshua means. They are bread for us. We will eat their lunch. Their protection is already removed from them, as the Lord said. And the Lord is with us, not with them. And so we do not need to fear them. The people didn't like that at all. They listened to the majority of the spies, 10 of them. They didn't listen to Joshua or Caleb. And God gets mad, and he says to Moses, how long will these people despise me? And how long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the signs that I have wrought among them? Folks, what have these people seen in the last 3 years? They've seen the 10 plagues. Not just the 10 plagues. The God was not only the cause of these plagues, which were natural phenomena multiplied by 100 or 1,000. A lot of these things occurred naturally, but on the scale that God provided in the land of Egypt, there is no way that those things could have been explained except God. These plagues not only were caused by God, but they also were cured by God. He was the beginning and the end of them. And the people of Israel, for the most part, were protected from the consequences of them. Isn't that great? And then they saw the sea open up. They saw the Egyptian army drown. God gave them victory over the Amalekites, which is one of the people that they're supposed to go in and fight. God has already given them victory. All these signs how God has provided. And who in the world has ever had a God that has shown himself to a people with all of these miraculous wonders, and day after day after day appeared before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night? 3 years of watching this. God says, I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you, remember he's talking to Moses, and I will make of you, Moses, a nation greater and mightier than they. Okay, now put yourself in Moses' shoes. First of all, did Moses want this job? Nope, God chose somebody else. I'm not eloquent. I'm not up for this. You got to pick on somebody else. I don't want the job. And for the 3 years that Moses has had this job, the people have given Moses nothing but trouble. Has Moses delighted in anything? He has delighted only in what the Lord has done. He has not delighted in the people of Israel. They have been a thorn in his side. And after 3 years of this stuff, Moses must be tempted to say, I quit. And now God is offering me a promotion. He's going to wipe out all of them and start again with me. I need a vacation. But Moses' concern was not his glory. Moses' concern was the glory of God. And he was willing to stick it out no matter what it cost him. And boy, did it. So this is how he responds to God's offer. Moses said to the Lord, now if you kill this people, just like they're just a single person, then the nations who have heard of your fame will say, it is because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land, and he swore to give them, and he has killed them all in the wilderness. So he appeals to God's power. They're going to say, you ain't got the power. And then he appeals to God's personality. And now please let the power of the Lord be great as you have promised, saying the Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and in transgression. And he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation. Please pardon the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your steadfast love, just as you have forgiven this people since they came out of Egypt up until this point. God, who is going to be attracted to our God if they think you're not powerful, or that you're not a God that keeps his promises and is slow to anger and is forgiving of his people? Who wants a God where you have to tiptoe around all the time? God, please don't do this. And God tells Moses, okay, I've pardoned them, but there are still going to be consequences. As I live, declares the Lord, your dead bodies, that's according to the census, there's 603,000 foot soldiers, not to mention the old people, or the Levites, or the women, or the children. So there's probably between 2 and 4 million people. Your dead bodies will fall in the wilderness. And all of that number listed in the census from 20 years old upward, who have grumbled against me, not one shall come into the land which I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. But your little ones, whom you said were going to be a prey to your enemies in the land, I'm going to bring them in, and they will know the land that you have rejected. But as for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness. They estimated that because of the number of people, there were in excess of 70 funerals a day. You know, in every epidemic or war or natural disaster, there is always a certain number of businesses that make a fortune during that time. So that was to be the time to be in the funeral business. And your children that you said the enemy was going to kill, your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness for 40 years, and they shall suffer for your faithlessness until the last of your dead bodies lie in the wilderness. And it's going to take 40 years for God to kill all these people. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, in case you're wondering how he came up with the number 40 years. A year for each day you shall bear your iniquity 40 years, and you shall know my displeasure. All right. What does all this teach us? Well, for some of us, nothing. But this is what it's supposed to teach us. First of all, our complaining, all of our complaining is ultimately against God. Every situation that God brings in our lives, every problem, every person is ultimately from God. That doesn't mean that you don't need to say something about things that need to be corrected, because sometimes God brings problems into your life to see what you're going to do about them. But if there's nothing in the Word that God wants you to do about them, then shut your mouth and quit complaining. Quit blaming your husband or your wife or the president or whatever, because ultimately complaining is against God. And the people of Israel said, no, we're not complaining against God. We're not that stupid. We're complaining against Moses and Aaron. It's their fault. All right? Well, this is how Moses and Aaron say. The whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and this is what they say. Well, the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him. What are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. Well, you can say that all you want, Moses and Aaron, but we're really grumbling against you, not the Lord. So let's just ask the Lord. What does he say? Glad you asked. And the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And God says, how long shall this wicked congregation grumble against me? I have heard the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against me. Because, folks, our complaining ultimately is against God. And Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 14, do all things without grumbling or questioning, in order that you might be a people of God that exists among a perverse and crooked generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Which means if you do complain and you're constantly whining about this or that, then you are not shining as lights in the world. What else does this teach us? There is a limit to what God will tolerate. Not what God can tolerate, but what God will tolerate. He has drawn a line in his mind. He says, you just keep on doing what I told you not to do and refusing to do what I told you to do, and you get to this line, and then the consequences are going to start. And you get to this line over here, and that's it. And the people complained in the hearing of God about their misfortunes. And what happened? Fire on the outskirts of the camp. You would think that they would say, wow, maybe we ought to shut our traps. And then, oh, we want something to eat. Well, fine, you'll eat till it comes out your nostrils. And Moses' own brother and sister, they didn't get the idea either. And it cost Miriam a week of shame and humiliation living outside of the camp of Israel because she wasn't allowed in because she had leprosy. There is a limit to what God will tolerate. He starts with small consequences to get our attention, and then the severity of the consequences begin to increase, and finally, there comes that final straw. And that's it. And he's not changing his mind. What else does it teach us? Our sin makes things bad for those that we love. And the irony about it is we will use the people that we love as an excuse not to obey God. We can't go in the land. Why? Because we'll die and our children will die. We've got to protect our children. I mean, that's the right thing to do, isn't that? Isn't that what parents are supposed to do? What did God say? As for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness for 40 years, and they're going to suffer because of your unfaithfulness. Okay? You think you're protecting your children by not being an example and trusting the Lord? You need to think again. Back in 1956, missionaries down in Ecuador were very interested in reaching the Waodani tribe. Anybody who had ever approached this tribe had been killed. One of their favorite words in the tribe was spear. They'll sit around a campfire. And a couple of guys, family members, they'll get into a discussion and one will get mad at the other and he'll just pick up a spear and thrust him through. That's just what they do. And if strangers come in, like missionaries, they spear them. And they speared 5 missionaries. And the widow of one of the missionaries had a daughter who was 2 or 3 years old. And she says, the Wadawi people need to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. And God has placed it on my heart to tell them the gospel. You take your child in there, Elizabeth Elliot, and probably neither one of you will come out alive. But Elizabeth Elliot said, maybe so. But this is what God wants me to do. And she went back into the very people who had killed her husband with her toddler daughter. And many came to know Jesus Christ because of it. And she has sought just to protect her daughter. Well, my daughter's not going to get a good education. She's going to run around naked like the rest of the natives. And any kind of excuse that you can think of for not going in there and using your children as an excuse for disobeying the Lord, you are going to be doing them a disservice, and they will suffer because of your faithfulness or faithlessness. It is best if you show your children that we obey the Lord no matter what it costs. And let God come through for you. He will. One more thing. God does not play favorites. Who among the congregation of Israel has been most faithful to God? Well, there was Moses. And there was Caleb and Joshua. And for the most part, Aaron and Miriam. And they're probably thinking when God declared, your dead bodies are going to fall for the next 40 years in the wilderness, that didn't include them. But this is what God says, as I live, declares the Lord, your dead bodies shall fall in the wilderness, and all of your number listed in the census from 20 years old and upward who have grumbled against me, not one shall come into the land as I swore to make you dwell, except Caleb and Joshua. Do you see Moses' name in there? You see Miriam's name? You see Aaron's name? Anybody else's name? Nope. God doesn't play favorites. Moses and Aaron and Miriam all were unfaithful to God, and their bodies died in the wilderness as well. God does not play favorites. God tells Moses, and we'll discuss more about this next time, you failed to honor me as holy. The other peoples, they can disregard what their gods say, but I'm different. I'm holy. And you, especially as a leader, cannot treat me as anything but holy. So let's determine, because in the coming years, very soon, we're going to have lots of opportunities, fearful, frightening opportunities, to demonstrate that no matter what it costs us, we're going to do what God says we ought to be doing.